Hello everybody and welcome to Two Catholics Thinking. We're back for our next episode. We're taking a little bit of a different format. We're here actually thinking together in person in the same space. So welcome, thanks for joining us. Brenden, good to see you again. My name is Cady, and our topic today for Two Catholics Thinking is exploring the season of Advent and Christmas. Really looking at what these seasons are and how we can enter more fully into them. So, Brenden, let's talk about Advent first. When you think of the season of Advent, what is Advent ultimately about?
Well, I think it starts off with, John the Baptist saying, prepare the way of the Lord. It's a time of preparation, of getting ready for something new, something spectacular, something unheard of in the incarnation. And so I think the idea of reliving, first of all, the reliving of the anticipation of the Israelites waiting for the Messiah. And then our time as we're preparing for this Christmas, and then also our preparation for Christ coming again. Mm-hmm. So living all three of those periods of preparation.
Yeah, for me, there's something about Advent that just kind of captures like the realness of salvation history, because there's a sense in which I think it would be easy for God's people, having known their story, having known their history, having known these promises that God had made to them, but then kind of looking around their situation like, things do not seem to be as God said they were going to be, and it seems like it could be easy to lose hope, easy to think like, maybe all of this was just, wishful thinking on our part, and then suddenly like this building expectation, this prophetic announcement that no, God's coming, God's going to visit his people, God's going to make things right, God's going to kind of set the world back in right order. I think there's this mixture of like, man, I can't wait. Is that really going to happen? And I think it's easy for us to think that also in the Christian life, that we have Jesus who's come, who's changed everything, and now there's a sense of like, but we still look around the world and we see brokenness and we see darkness, and like, is it really going to make a difference? Like, is the kingdom really here? Is it really among us? So I love this like tension of this hope and this also hesitancy,
Yeah, like when you were saying that, it reminded me of the old Jesus of Nazareth, the Zeffirelli film. I remember watching that when I was a kid, and there was this one scene where this guy's like kind of being Israel is being picked on by the Romans, and his anger, and he's crying out, how long, Lord? And Jesus, this young boy, is watching this, and so it's like. It's that already but not yet, that thing that the promise that you're looking for is right there before you just don't notice it yet.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so that sense of, even now, it's very difficult sometimes in the midst of, the kind of the secular mode and understanding of the Christmas season, which is really the Advent season. That we get caught up in the commercialization and the gift giving and the holiday rush and craziness and stress, and you forget that spiritual side. You forget that in the midst of all that craziness and chaos, just as in the midst of all the craziness and chaos of Bethlehem during the census, Christ was born.
Yeah.
And so he comes in that craziness, and so I think it's being able to be like the shepherds or the wise men, to be aware, to pay attention, not be the countless other people that were unaware of what was the revolution that was taking place right in their midst.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a sense in which in the world, we hit Thanksgiving and then we jump right to Christmas. And as Christians, we take Christmas so seriously that we have a whole period of just getting ready for Christmas, right? Like this is all just a preparation for what we will celebrate coming in the future. And so I think it's helpful for us to remember Advent as its own separate season. It certainly looks forward to Christmas. It's informed by Christmas. We obviously know that Christ has come, but we all also place ourselves in this like pretending as if we're still those people who are waiting for his first coming. Because I think one way the church speaks of it is that Christ has come through his incarnation. He will come again, we know, in the judgment of the living and the dead, and that's part of what we recall during this time of Advent, is making ourselves ready for the Lord when he returns. But there's also a sense, I think, that we can easily forget that God daily wants to come into our lives, that God daily wants to meet us and make a home in us. And so how do we prepare ourselves daily to receive the Lord? How do we prepare our hearts to be like a space where God can really dwell? And so then like the power of God, the promises of God can actually like take root in our lives,
Yeah, that's like, I'm not sure if this is the original story, but I remember watching one of the film versions of The Christmas Carol. And when Scrooge ends up running into the ghost of Christmas Present. He says something about welcoming the Christ child, and he talks about people that welcome the Christ child in their hearts every day, and which was surprising because it was like, wow, that's very religious for me. It was an older version of Christmas Carol that they did it, but that notion of welcoming the Christ child every day of your life, and I think that that's what the time of Advent allows us to do that more consciously, and by doing almsgiving and prayers and just being a little bit more conscious of it. I think a lot of the spiritual life boils down to awareness, and just being aware of, what is God doing in my life.
Yeah, I think it comes back to conversion, right? Like the entire Christian life is about this ongoing process of conversion. The church speaks of it that way. Certainly there might be particular moments or periods of our life where we have a profound turning to the Lord. But even once we make that turn and say, all right, I'm all in, I'm following Jesus, there's still this work of conversion that takes place daily within us. And I think the wisdom in the church giving us these seasons is that conversion and time go together very well, right? So the more time we dedicate to something, we invest in something, the more fruitful our efforts can be. And so the church is kind of making us like, don't rush to Christmas, gradually gear up to Christmas. So that way you're best disposed for when Christmas comes. Now I'm ready. Like my mind is ready, my heart is ready, my life is ready to really celebrate the season as the season then.
I resonate with that a lot because I feel like the blessing of God is constantly trying to reteach me his patience. Because I'm always moving forward. I'm always like, okay, Lord, I'm ready, do it. And he's like, no, you're not ready.
Yeah.
You have to start over. You've got to take it one step at a time. And I mean, the history of salvation, which we kind of relived during this time period of Advent. I mean, God took thousands of years to prepare for his son to come. So that shows how much patience God has and how much time he takes in preparing this great gift. Because if he wouldn't have done that, if he would have given the Israelites, if Jesus would have shown up right at the time of Moses, they wouldn't have been ready for it. And I think that's the same thing. If we just jump right into Christmas, we're not ready. We're just like, rip open the presents and okay, it's over.
Right. And that's the thing, right? That's what usually happens in the world is December 25th rolls around, December 26th, we're like, all right, what's next? And we forget that we celebrate for a long time. That this is what I love about Catholicism. When it's time to repent, when it's time to fast, when it's time to be introspective, we take that very seriously. But when it's time to party, it's time to party, and let's really celebrate, right? And so we don't celebrate Christmas as just a day, we celebrate it as an entire season. And I think that's where partly we can then become like evangelistic in how we even celebrate Christmas. I know, for example, I put our Christmas lights up ahead of time, like during the season of Advent, usually around like, the first or second week into Advent. But I intentionally leave them up all the way through the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord, because I just want to communicate like, hey, we're still celebrating Christmas. Now, I think my neighbors just think we're lazy and have to take our Christmas lights down. So I was joking with my wife, I want to put like a sign in our yard that says, yes, we know our lights are still on. We're still celebrating Christmas until the Feast of the Baptism of the Lord. But even, doing crazy things like we have Christmas parties on December 20th rather than having Christmas parties on December 28th,
Yeah.
Or, make cookies for family members or friends, like let's make cookies and give them to them on December 30th. Merry Christmas, right? It's still Christmas. We're still celebrating. I think it'd be really cool too to like go Christmas caroling on December 27th. Like, dude, you missed it. You're 2 days late. Nope, it's still Christmas.
I think it would be an interesting thing to do, although I think really difficult to save maybe a special Christmas present or one Christmas present for the Feast of the Epiphany,
right.
And have that there. Now, of course, you get a lot of kids irate and stuff.
Right,
but I mean, that's something that I do know that like in the Hanukkah is an 8-day celebration, and I know that some Jews practice that where they have gifts every day for 8 days, spread out. And so it's I think that's also another invitation to to have the patience in Advent, but to savor the celebration in Christmas,
right? And
not you should overindulge for one day, but to have that celebration extended out over the entire season.
Yeah, like have dessert every night during Christmas, right? Like just these external signs that these days, these times, these seasons are set apart, that they're unique. And I think that that's where we have to find a nice balance of not fighting against the culture in a way of like, you've gotten it wrong and let me show you how to get it right. But to be invitational, to be attractive. Like, no, you only get Christmas for a day. Oh, that's really sad. We get Christmas for an entire like season of weeks, right? And you're invited to celebrate in this way too. And so keeping our Christmas tree up until the Epiphany, like we always do that, and even with little kids who tear the ornaments down and break some balls throughout the Christmas season. But there's a goodness, I think, in even our kids remembering that we're still celebrating. It's still Christmas, because then Christmas becomes about what it's meant to be about, which is like this rejoicing that God has visited his people, rejoicing that God truly is Emmanuel, a God who is with us, who dwells among us.
Yeah, I think that that's really what, going back to these traditions are. I think there's something to be said in the fact that what the secular celebration of Christmas, why it focuses more on the preparation, the anticipation, is you really think about it from the secular side, they are still waiting.
Mm-hmm.
They're still waiting for Christ because it's missing.
Right.
Whereas when we get to Christmas, we have him. So I think there is that invitation of like, no, now is the time to rejoice because it has, and that's opportunity to give the greatest Christmas present of all, which is Christ himself.
Right. It's always fascinating. We always talk with my kids about how it's very ironic that the day that we celebrate Jesus' birth, he's the one that doesn't get presents, right? It reveals partly just God's superabundance of goodness, like I know it's my birthday, but I love you enough that I'm giving you. You're the one that's going to get the presents. But then at the same time, I think there's a sense in which once we come to realize God's great gift to us, once we realize how much God has blessed us with truly the greatest gifts in the heavens, it then moves us not to a place of like pride and arrogance, like I'm better than others because God has loved me in this way. But now I become like, in a certain sense, like responsible for bearing witness to this gift, right? So if the light has come into the world and Jesus is the light of the world, and I see that and I recognize that, then I think my job then is to be a light to others, to help illuminate the darkness in the world, and not just be, oh man, thank God I'm not in the darkness like those people. No, how can I then be a source of light for them? And so even in Christmas, there's like this missionary aspect because God, in a sense, sent his heavenly missionary among us, at Christmas. Like Jesus broke into our world in order to transform it, and then he sends us into the world in order to transform it.
And going back to the idea of Christ's gift, what does Christ get for his birthday? I remember in the Gospel of John, he says, "You are the Father's gift to me." He says about his disciples, and I just kind of imagine like a young child carrying around a teddy bear or a blanket because this was what my daddy gave me.
Yeah.
And that closeness and that intimacy of that. And so how much he wants us to be with him and wants that present there. And so that I think that missionary aspect is like, hey, give more Jesus more presents. Go find more disciples.
Right.
Like bring them to him. Like they're far more precious than gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Right, yeah. That's awesome. So practically speaking, like how can we really enter into the season of Advent? I know we're a couple of weeks into the season of Advent now. How can we really celebrate Advent as Advent, and how can we celebrate Christmas as Christmas?
Well, I think in terms of like focusing on it, I think first in just in terms of the mindset of like, okay, what am I doing to prepare? How am I preparing the way in my heart, in my life, in my community? How am I getting ready for the Lord to come into my life? And so I think that's the first way that I would approach Advent. And I think in terms of Christmas, really entering into the joy of it and sharing that joy. Like you said, go out of your way to like, be a little crazy in terms of like having your Christmas lights still up, right. Going out and having those celebratory things. And I think especially now during this time of pandemic, that people need that and want that.
Yeah.
And I think it's, we asked her earlier, like, is it okay to enter into the Christmas spirit a little earlier this year?
Right.
I think it's also okay to extend it a little bit longer.
Totally. I think that there's also a sense in which, like, because what Christmas is God certainly breaks into creation to do something new, but he does something in the minds and hearts of people that requires their cooperation. And so in a certain sense, like, the good news is that God has made all things new, But at the same time, because of our fallenness, because of our sin, we're resistant to that newness to some extent, right? And so part of the season of Advent is like, okay, am I really ready? Like, do I really recognize, yes, there's great joy in Christ coming, but there's also going to be like a work that needs to be done. Almost like like physical therapy, right? If you injure yourself and you need physical therapy to like be restored to full health, there's a goodness in physical therapy, but there's also a difficulty and a challenge and a discomfort to it in some sense. In the same way, like, the good news is that God makes all things new. No matter what we've done or who we've been, God can recreate us in holiness. But at the same time, that recreation might cost us. It might challenge us. It might demand us. And so part of Advent is like, all right, I got to get ready. I got to get ready for the work that lies before me. And then Christmas, though, is where we then realize that, you know what? Regardless of the extent to which this work has been done in me, I still now become a co-worker. I remember Pope Francis, he says that love doesn't have to be perfect for it to be valuable. And I think that's very fitting in terms of our relationship with God. We don't have to love the Lord perfectly before God is willing and able to use us to extend his love to others.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good way of thinking of that. Like in the first and the Advent thing is to remind ourselves that it is a penitential season, like Lent. Mm-hmm. Now, it's supposed to be joyful expectation, not sorrowful, preparation for the cross. But it's still penitential. It is still like, okay, I have to level the plains. I got to remove the roadblocks. I got to prepare this highway for the Lord in my heart. So that means I got to change some things. Yeah. And if you ever see road construction, it's painful and messy and takes a long time. So I think that kind of sense of that physical therapy that we have to go through. And I know even in my own journey through this Advent, I've struggled with trying to stay consistent and forthright in my own penitential practices. But again, then looking at allowing yourself to have that, like allowing yourself to stumble through your preparation and through your celebration, that God rewards effort, and trying. I always hate Star Wars for having said for Yoda saying do or do not, there is no try. That is a lot. There's absolutely I like Star Wars in other ways, but that line is just like, no, there's definitely a try. God says try.
Yeah, I think C.S. Lewis talks about that too. He says, when you're talking about virtue, he says sometimes the first steps in cultivating virtue is just getting up when you failed, like trying again when you failed, right? Because without that commitment to even try, we're never going to actually achieve like the perfection of virtue. So I think that this season of Christmas, what I would recommend, I think, for us to spend some time really reflecting on like the reality that the God of the universe, out of great love, out of his free, gracious will, chose to enter into our fallen humanity in order to draw us to himself. Like, sometimes we can hear these things like, oh, sweet little baby Jesus, and God sent his son, and all these things. But when we stop and like rest with the magnitude of that, like the God of the universe, right? The God of all creation, like chose to confine himself as a little baby. And it's always fascinating that he came as a baby, that he didn't just like incarnate as a 30-year-old man and like roll into Jerusalem and start his ministry. He lived for 30 years of his life in relative obscurity and insignificance. And the Catechism says something very beautiful about that when this ordinariness of Jesus's life, that he is thereby like consecrated the ordinary, that nothing now is ordinary anymore, because Jesus has dwelt into the fullness of what it means to be human. And so even in our daily lives, like the joy of Christmas permeates everything. It permeates now washing dishes and changing diapers and getting up in the middle of the night. You're like, to help a kid. Like all these things now are like consecrated things because Jesus has entered into humanity in like the fullest sense. Like that to me is like the magnitude and the beauty of the incarnation that we celebrate at Christmas.
Yeah, and I think just, as you said, just being aware of that and just like taking a moment to stop and think about what no one has ever heard of anything like this. Like when you think about the incarnation, no other religion, no other faith claims that God, the creator of all the universe, the infinite, the most powerful, came down and became human. That does not, no other faith, no other religion says that God wanted so much to dwell with his people that he became one of us.
Right. I think, just kind of to wrap this up, for me, what the verse that always stands out to me is when the angels appear to the shepherds at Jesus' birth, and they say, I proclaim to you good news of great joy, that today in the city of David a Savior has been born for you, who is both Lord and Messiah. That to me captures the whole Christmas season. That God has proclaimed to us, or God has manifested to us, a good news of great joy. And so I think the first response to the gift of God's life in the incarnation is great joy, recognizing that this is a time to rejoice because God is good. And then at the same time, for that to permeate our lives in such a way that we live as joyful people in the world. And joy isn't a pretending that there's nothing bad or nothing difficult or nothing challenging. It's just this assurance that, no matter what, Jesus is born, right? No matter what, God has visited his people. No matter what, God is Emmanuel, who draws close to us to draw us to himself. So I think as we move forward, as we approach this season of Christmas, let's really remember this great gift of God's love, this great gift of the incarnation, and allow it to fill us with joy and radiate that joy in the world.
That's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you, Brenden. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time.